we head on out to the Ramos Law Hotline. Car accident, need Ramos Law, medical doctor and attorney. Find them at ramoslaw.com, where we are joined by Cody Roark, the host of the Locked On Broncos podcast. Cody, what's up, brother?
How's it going, fellas? Good to see you.
Great to see you as well.
Hey, Cody, you were yesterday at OTAs, and your first time seeing some of these new faces, namely these incoming rookies that were drafted. There's a player that I didn't hear a lot of talk about yesterday coming off of OTAs, but the question I have for you, Jahdae Barron, what do you see in terms of where he lines up in the 2025 season for Vance Joseph on that side of the rock?
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting. I saw some people were even messaging me saying, hey, how come we haven't heard anything about him? Like, no news is honestly good news when it comes to that. Obviously with no Patrick Surtain out there yesterday at OTAs, you got to see a little bit more of an extended look at the Broncos kind of mixing and matching their personnel and nickel and base and, even in the dime package there. Barron's going to play a little bit all over. I think that's something that we saw yesterday. I mean, there's going to be times I think they want to match him up on the outside. There might be a favorable matchup inside in the slot that they may like to capitalize on. So we got to see him work at all those spots yesterday. And even a few reps, I got to watch him against Courtland Sutton. And you can see when he's reading, like I said, you can tell when the Broncos are playing man, they're playing zone. But you could just tell how instinctual he is, because if Sutton's condensed closer to the line of scrimmage, he's adjusting, obviously, his cushion. And obviously, depending on the release of Sutton, how he's going to try to break on that or get into phase. You see the football IQ on display with a guy like Jade Baron. And I think that's going to be a seamless fit here with this defense. It would have been nice to see him working in with Pat Surtain, but obviously, a little bit more of an extended look at Baron, Jaquan McMillan, and obviously Riley Moss, a little bit, further look without PS2 on the field.
Cody, you bring up a really interesting guy there, Jaquan McMillan. Jaquan, he's a guy that with the draft pick of Jahdae Barron, you wonder about his future. I think he's played himself into being a really impactful part of this defense. And you brought up the word dime package, where you could potentially see 6 DBs on the field at one time. What kind of flexibility does Jahdae Barron give you to also play as slot nickel corner in addition to Jaquan McMillan on the field at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I would even say the same thing applies to J-Mac with how the Broncos were also using him. He could play outside as well. We saw a little bit of look at that yesterday. I mean, Coach, you know this as well as anybody. We go back to that Bengals game last year. They had so many different receiving matchups, and obviously tight end you had to factor in the equation. Now the Broncos believe with the addition of Barron, they believe they can match certain guys up without having to move guys around, right? Like if you wanted to move Pat Surtain against Jamar Chase, which we're going to see that Monday Night Football, week 4 of the season, great. You want to match up different guys, with T. Higgins. You could even match up where your game plan against T. Higgins is you're going to have someone covering him inside the nickel. Could be Barron, could be J-Mac, could be Riley Moss, but having a safety over the top. They believe they got guys who could play man-to-man coverage at a frequent rate. And it also allows them the opportunities to maybe dial up the blitz a little bit more, even though they were very aggressive last year with it. They believe they have the cover guys now. And if Dre Greenlaw obviously stays healthy at inside linebacker, they believe they have a coverage guy at linebacker that helps them protect that middle of the field, that second-level security blanket. So I think the addition of Barron gives the Broncos defense extremely more flexibility. Same thing with McMillan and obviously with Riley Moss too.
Cody Roark, our guest on the Ramos Law Hotline today, talking about Broncos OTAs. Certainly a lot of depth now in the secondary for the Broncos, but also on the opposite side of that position group now with the wide receivers. It was a little bit of a controversial draft pick, I suppose, with Pat Bryant. What did you see out of the rookie yesterday?
No, he moves so fluidly. When you watch him run routes, everyone's talking about, he ran a 5.6, a 4.6 40-yard dash. 5.6 would be a little bit more realistic to be concerned. 4.6, not really worried about that. But, man, when you watch this guy run routes, he's very fluid. He breaks down properly. I would say there might be an early argument, watching these guys yesterday. I feel like Pat Bryant will end up being the best route runner on the team. I feel like that's going to be something that we will see. A lot of people are talking about like the Jerry Jeudy, route running ability. I mean, he's not speedy like Jerry, but I think he can do all of that without having to be as fast as Jerry is. Very fluid with it. I think understands how to attack, different leverages of coverage, especially if he's got a guy playing inside leverage. He knows how to exploit that to where he can get the advantage if he is running an in-breaking route against inside leverage. He's a physical specimen too. 6'3". This is a guy who the Broncos obviously brought in as well because they know he's going to be a willing blocker. but they believe he's going to have an impact in, I think, the middle of the field passing game primarily, and I'm excited to see that kind of come to fruition. I found it interesting. Sean Payton actually told us yesterday, and this kind of, it makes sense when you look at the roster on paper, but Sean pretty much said that we got a bunch of guys at wide receiver that aren't necessarily competing for spots. They're competing for touches. So I think Courtland, Marvin, Troy, Devon Vele, and obviously Pat Bryant, those guys are going to be, I think, firmly in the mix as the key wide receivers here. Whereas I do think that Courtland and Devon Vele are probably going to be the two mainstays at that position with those other three guys rotating in primarily.
Yeah, you bring up that Devon Vele looked fantastic, even put on a little bit of weight. You see people seeing him yesterday at OTA, couldn't stop talking about what he looks like stature-wise. A player that's of interest when you bring up competing for touches, and Sean Payton was actually specifically talking about Marvin Mims Jr. Marvin Mims Jr. is a player in his third year where you did invest draft capital to go out and get a player with speed. Should the Broncos be using Marvin Mims as somebody that's got to earn his touches, or should they be going out and creating touches for a guy that is a bit different and has a different skill set than the majority of your receiving core with real legitimate tangible speed?
Yeah, no, I think they should create more opportunities for him. I mean, we've been kind of pounding the table for the last couple of years, even when Marvin's rookie year. Like Marvin's rookie year early on, he was having an impact. We were seeing him in the passing game. He has a massive catch against the Chicago Bears that sets up Will Lutz's game-winning field goal in their comeback that they had. And then we don't see him in the offense, where it's like, is Russell Wilson just not throwing him the football? We saw in week 2 against the Commanders, he had 2 catches for 113 yards and then didn't have a single target in the second half after that. That was wild to me. This is a guy that I think the Broncos need to try to create touches for, create opportunities with because of his speed. Now, I think this is where, Coach, the addition of Evan Ingram comes into play, right? When you have a tight end who can attack that middle of the field where you can just, hey, you need 6 yards, he can run a crosser, right? And the defense is going to cheat up a little bit to protect the sticks. That's where Marvin can get behind defenses, can maybe get a safety to kind of bite on something. You need that dynamic, and we saw it down the second half stretch last year. So much of that I think is on the coaches more so than is Marvin, because Marvin's out there. There's times where Marvin's been open, but nobody's hit him. Russell Wilson didn't hit him, or Bo went to his first read because his first read was open. That's what you want to do. You want your quarterback to make the right play, but we saw what Marvin can do downfield, and I think there's definitely got to be an element to that. He's obviously still going to be the punt returner for this team because he can produce at an elite level at that position, flip field position for you. It's just about trying to figure out what are those touches going to look like. He didn't have as many snaps as other guys. I think he was like 4th overall snaps at wide receiver compared to guys like Troy Franklin, Lil Jordan Humphrey, and even Devon Vele had more overall snaps last season than he did. So I think it's about trying to find a way to get him on the field more.
When it comes to touches, last year, and actually you make the point of it might be more on the coaching staff to manufacture touches for Marvin Mims rather than him to win those touches. The running back room was a disaster last year. When you walked into OTAs and you saw, I suppose, a new look running back room, that's exactly what it is, and you utilize a big-time draft pick on RJ Harvey, did it feel any different? Did it feel more dynamic? Or did it feel a little bit like last year where you go, I don't really know who the go-to guy is?
I think there is a little bit of mystery of we don't know who the go-to guy is going to be, but it definitely seems like right now, I was actually kind of shocked yesterday. I always thought it was going to be Audric Estime and RJ Harvey, and then everybody else mixing in. It looked like Jaleel McLaughlin and RJ Harvey were getting the first looks for the Broncos, in that rotation, in individual drills. But I also found it interesting, even Sean Payton mentioned Audric Estime, said in year 2, they want to see what they drafted him for, like the physicality, his ability to kind of wear defenses down. But he said that, you look at the overall amount of touches, he's the type of guy that requires a lot of touches. So the grade on him was incomplete from last year, but he's going to get opportunities to get those touches. It doesn't sound like it's guaranteed here for Audric Estime, more so than I think it is a guy like Jaleel and RJ Harvey at this point. It sounds like Audric's probably got a lot more pressure on him than I think anybody else in that running back room, which I think is going to make things very interesting here for training camp.
two mid-round defenders that haven't gotten a lot of buzz, but I think could be very impactful for this Broncos defense going forward. Outside linebacker Savion Jones, who's drafted out of LSU, listed now as a defensive end in a 3-4 scheme, so moving inside at 6'6", 280 pounds. And then Q Robinson, the linebacker from Alabama. What'd you see from those two players and seeing their body types, their movement skills? How do you think they impact the defense for the Broncos?
Yeah, I think first off, Savion Jones is probably going to have a bigger impact right away defensively for Denver as opposed to Q. And it's only because of the Broncos' pass rusher depth with Benito, with Jonathan Cooper, Dondre Tillman, Jonah Ellis. Those guys obviously having deserved reps ahead right now. So he's going to have to make some hay in the preseason, I think, to really kind of, make the mark. But I think he's going to play special teams. Q Robinson, I think he's going to play special teams right away, probably be a core 4 specialist. Savion Jones, I think, is going to factor into the rotation right away behind John Franklin Myers, behind, obviously, Zach Allen, and alongside Jordan Jackson. I think those are two quality guys that when you come off the field with those guys, they believe they're not going to get a lot of drop-off. Body type-wise, Savion Jones, he's perfect to play defensive end in this scheme with Jamar Cain. And I think, obviously, the familiarity. Jamar Cain coached him initially at LSU in 2021. So you have that familiarity, but this is a room that I think that he's coming into it. Zach Allen's going to take him under his wing. They're very selfless. I don't know if you had a chance to see Zach Allen sit down with Chris Long on Long's podcast that he had, but he talked about the unselfishness, the selflessness that those guys in that position room have to create opportunities. So Savion Jones, I think body type wise, he's perfect. He's going to be a high motor, and also it could help the Broncos with their decision. I know John Franklin Myers wants a contract extension. This may be a guy who, maybe next year upends JFM in that lineup if the Broncos can't pay him.
Let's open that up a little bit. No JFM, obviously Zach Allen's also looking for another extension, or at least a pay bump. Certainly, he's been more outspoken about that in recent months. Is that kind of hovering a shadow or a rain cloud over OTAs right now? Both of those
I wouldn't say
contract
necessarily
disputes.
it is, because last year we even saw with JFM wasn't here for OTAs last year, and from talking to people in the New York Jets beat, even he would never show up for OTAs as a member of the New York
The
Jets.
guy
either.
hates OTAs, man. He thinks it's dumb.
Voluntary is voluntary, is mine. But he will be here, from what I've been told, he will be here for mandatory minicamp. JFM wants to get paid. I think when you look at, obviously, the pressure he created last year, he was a much added addition to that room. He definitely has a gripe and I think a deserving to be extended, because he did, I think, take a little bit less when the Broncos restructured his deal after the Jets trade. He deserves to get paid, but the problem is you got to pay Nick Benito. You got to pay Zach Allen. That's tough.
Because of the intangible traits of second-year quarterback Bo Nix. True or false, Cody? Bo Nix is immune from a sophomore slump.
I think true. I think with the pieces that he has around him, with the way that he prepares, coach, I think, the idea of a sophomore slump, I would be shocked. I'd be very shocked. A lot of people are talking about CJ Stroud, but people aren't even including the context when it comes to CJ Stroud, that CJ lost Nico Collins for almost a good portion of the season with a hamstring injury. And then he also lost key members on his offensive line. Now they've traded guys away on that offensive line. You lose Tank Dell right after you get Nico Collins back. You just didn't have enough around him, I think, to produce. And so he had some struggles last year, but he's not the reason they lost in the playoffs against the Chiefs. I thought he was the reason they were actually competitive against KC in that playoff game. So I would be shocked. It would be earth-shatteringly shocking if Bo Nix has a sophomore slump. I think unless there's a major injury, to two guys on the O-line or maybe a skill player, maybe that's into the equation. But I think that Bo's in a good position. He's got a good system around him. He's in more control of the offense. It would be shocking to me if that's the case.
That is Cody Roark. Listen to him on the Locked On Broncos podcast. You can read him at milehighsports.com as well. Cody, appreciate your time and the insights on Broncos OTA. Thanks, man.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate you guys so much.
Follow him at Cody Roark NFL on Twitter.